the difference between Mercia and Wessex, Utid replied. The Picts are part of Alba, as Mercia and Wessex are becoming your grandfather's dream of England. And there was the unspoken postscript, thought Finan. Northumbria was not where England was going to stop, it was what England was going to annex. Finan, at length, excused himself. After some time, his lord and dearest friend found himself sitting on a rocky outcrop on Bibbenberg's beach. Corpses still littered it, though they were beginning to be washed out to sea by the incoming tide. After you got Bibbenberg, he said vaguely. I did, Utid told him, sensing his assertion was not quite what he took it to be. I saw her today, Finan continued. By her, he meant Osrith. Of course. Yes, agreed Utid. It was probably her who opened the sea gate. That means she chose you, Finan reminded him, and nodded to the rampart where even now two crows were fighting over Wiha's head. Not her other brother. Utid said nothing. She had always chosen you, Finan told him, getting up. And where are you going? Utid asked. Finan had sworn an oath to follow Utid, which Utid had removed from him. Finan had pretended he hadn't heard him. Now, he stood in front of his friend and nodded to the fortress. You said when you took Bibbenberg I could marry, Finan reminded him. Osrith? Utid asked, shock in his voice which he wasn't quick enough to disguise. Yes, Finan nodded, making his way to the cut steps in the sandstone. Shall be halfway to Alba by now. Well then, Finan concluded, I'd better be taking a horse and ride all night then. He rippled and began to ascend the rocks. And then he turned and walked back towards Utid. She turned you down already? Utid jibed. But Finan kept on walking, towards the beach door, through which he had come. Thajal Agamoya, Finan replied, without breaking step or turning to his friend. What is that in your bastard tongue? Demanded Utid. Finan turned, his face completely fallen, dejected, so unhappy it hurt Utid to look at him. Hami Ersnabith Ermothiodlakard Kamalarimo de Oi North I post a Muthrat. Finan shouted back. She is married. He repeated, in Saxon. I promised her once that when you got Bibbenberg I would go to fetch her. Married? Sainid his name is, Finan told him. He is the one that owns the land that she has been farming, nothing to do with Constantine. He paused, then added, that bastard Ailch, the Uineal told me. Domnall, Findlaith's son. And what a delight he had taken in that, Finan thought to himself, bitterly, as he carried the ancient sigil of their land, the red hand, over his shoulder. Utid laughed. Sainid? Utid repeated. The general of the Alba army, Finan conceded, remembering the man's face at Corbridge when he asked for him to be pointed out. That old fart? Utid scoffed. I killed him on the beach this noontide. He nodded to the place. Finan took a few steps towards the corpse. Utid waited. A few heartbeats passed between the old friends, and then Finan picked up the second sword that he had intended to give back to its owner. I'm taking the white horse, he told Utid, calling over his shoulder across the sand. Utid smiled a wide, delighted smile. If anything could have made him happier about this day it was seeing the rising hope in his friend. You have my blessing, Finan ma tilde cubed to marry my sister. Utid shouted deliberately to his friend, who was now standing on the rocky promontory that centered the valley entrance of his reclaimed home. Finan did not turn. Instead, he held up his arm, buoy in hand, and waved with his other hand, before jumping astride the white horse, one of which that had been rounded up after the battle. And with no time to spare, he urged it on, north,